Feanor made a fateful choice. He would attempt to find at least one of his sons. Of the 7, Maedhros was the most resolute and cunning. If any could help him mount a stealth mission into Angband, it might be Maedhros. Rumors suggested that Maedhros' stronghold was on the northern fringes, where the sons of Feanor had tried to keep watch, though the region had become so dangerous that even the boldest found it nearly uninhabitable. In the dead of night, Feanor approached the tumbled stones of Himring, once Maedhros' fortress. Now it was half buried in rubble. Only a few worn watchtowers remained, manned by a handful of loyal guards who had not deserted their lord. Keeping to the shadows, Feanor slipped past the watchers, for he still retained a matchless skill in stealth and strategy. At last, he descended into a small courtyard. The place was deserted except for a single figure standing beneath the rusted remains of a beacon. Even from a distance, Feanor recognized the tall, lean form. Maedhros. His once bright hair was matted and streaked with sorrow, and his right sleeve hung empty, the arm lost to Morgoth's torment. A terrible sadness clung to him, but also a certain unyielding fire. Feanor paused. Could he truly step into the open and reveal himself? Or would Maedhros, believing some shape-shifting servant of Morgoth was at work, strike him down? Quyaem the father wrestled with these doubts. But love, or something akin to it, bested his fear. Quietly, he pulled back his hood and stepped forward. Maedhros stiffened, sensing a presence. He turned, and his keen grey eyes fell upon the gaunt figure. Doubtless he saw only a ragged cloak at first, but then the partial moonlight glimmered upon the face beneath the hood, illuminating that proud nose, the high cheekbones, and the unmistakable intensity in the gaze. Maedhros stumbled back, as though confronted by a wraith. He gasped, a single word that conveyed shock beyond mortal measure. No, it cannot be. Slowly, Feanor lowered his gaze, half in shame, half in fatherly sorrow. He parted his lips to speak, but his voice was cracked from disuse. Maedhros, I live. This is not a trick of Morgoth. For a moment, father and son stood in numb silence. Then Maedhros' expression contorted. Rage, grief, maybe even a flicker of joy. He launched forward, and they might have collided in a familial embrace, had not the bitterness of their long parting caused them both to falter. How? Maedhros demanded, voice trembling. All these years, did Mandos release you? Did the Valar show mercy? Feanor forced himself to meet his son's gaze. Nay, death never claimed me. My body was nearly destroyed in that battle, but some power, some scrap of flame in my spirit, it held me from the brink. I have wandered in secrecy since. A swirl of emotions played across Maedhros' face. Then you know all that has befallen us. Fingolfin, Fingon, the ruin of the Noldor, everything. Feanor inclined his head. Yes, I have learned much in hiding. I come now because I must. Our oath has not died. At the mention of the oath, Maedhros' eyes clouded with sorrow. Father, the oath has brought us nothing but despair and ruin. You yourself taught us to pursue it at all costs, and at every turn we have seen good people destroyed, alliances lost. For the first time in his life, Feanor wavered, recalling the kinslayings and all the tragedies. But that intangible fire in him would not let the oath go. The Silmarils, they are my life's work, a portion of my very soul. One remains with Morgoth. If we can somehow wrest it from him, perhaps we can rectify some part of our doom. Maedhros lowered his head. He seemed older, weighed by centuries of war. At length he nodded. If there is a way, I will help you. But know this, our forces are spent, and Morgoth's power is greater than ever. Then we shall not rely on force, Feanor replied. We will use cunning. From that night forward, father and son conspired in hushed tones within the crumbling fortress of Himring. The Watchers suspected that some new threat had arrived, but Maedhros quietly assured them otherwise. Only the most trusted few learned the stranger's secret identity. Feanor knew that if word of his survival spread, Morgoth would marshal every resource to recapture or destroy him. Thus, the final quest for the Silmaril began, not with triumphant horns, but in near silence, as stealthy as a thief in the night. It was the last year of the First Age, by the reckoning of the wise. Morgoth's dominion was almost absolute, and only pockets of resistance held out hope. At the same time, rumors spread in the camps of the Free Peoples that some great doom might soon come upon Morgoth. For the Valar had stirred in the west, Erendil had crossed the sea and pleaded for mercy. Yet the final confrontation was not yet at hand, and Morgoth still reigned from the towers of Thangorodrim. Feanor and Maedhros set out with a small band of trusted warriors. They navigated the labyrinth of gorges and rifts that led into the Anfauglith, the once fertile plain now turned to ash and dust. Disguises of orcish armor, though ill-fitting and loathsome to wear, aided their infiltration. They marched under a black banner, forged by Feanor with mocking craft, so that from a distance they would appear no different from any other orc patrol. As they drew near the gates of Angband, the air itself became a haze of malice. Plumes of dark smoke coughed from the forges below. Occasionally a monstrous winged shape soared overhead, a werewolf or a fell beast from Morgoth's breeding pits. By cunning misdirection, the band managed to slip into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Angband. Maedhros led them through side passages he had once learned during his captivity. Though he had never ventured so far in stealth, their hearts pounded at every turn, expecting at any moment to face a swarm of orcs or a Balrog. At length they reached a black door flanked by twisted iron pillars. Beyond it, rumor said, lay a lesser vault adjacent to Morgoth's own throne room. If the Silmaril was not kept there, it would at least be nearby. Now came the moment of greatest peril. Feanor pressed a hand to the door, feeling the thrum of dark enchantments. Still, he drew forth a small gem, a piece of cunning craft he had wrought. It was a shard of crystal, infused with the faint memory of Telperion and Lorelin's light, gleaned from the Noldorin artistry of old. Holding it to the door, he whispered words in Quenya that he had not uttered since Valinor. The crystal glowed faintly, unraveling the dark wards set upon the door. With a groan, the iron portals swung open. They emerged into a wide, torchlit corridor. Hideous carvings of wolfish beasts lined the walls. Beyond, they heard the faint rumble of Morgoth's throne room, where the Dark Lord presumably brooded upon his iron seat. Creeping along, the band passed a row of heavy stone chests. Within these, perhaps, lay the spoils of Morgoth's conquests. Could the Silmaril be hidden in one of these? Some of Maedhros's warriors eagerly pried open the lids, but each chest they opened contained only shards of tortured elven blades, or the bones of proud kings, or twisted lumps of precious metals. None held the jewel they sought. Dread clutched Feanor. Was the Silmaril still in Morgoth's crown, or kept in some hidden treasury? Time was running out. Any moment now, an alarm could be sounded. Then a robed figure appeared at the corridor's far end, bearing a tray of black goblets, likely for Morgoth's table. The figure startled, seeing the intruders. Feanor acted without hesitation, raising his sword. Though the robed thrall tried to flee, a swift strike felled him. But not before he cried out. The corridor exploded in chaos. A clang of alarm bells rang through the darkness, and from an archway emerged a troop of orcs. Leading them, with whips crackling, came a towering Balrog, its horned head wreathed in flame, a dreadful reminder of the foe that had nearly slain Feanor once before. Maedhros and his warriors formed a defensive ring, their blades glinting defiantly in the torchlight. Feanor felt the old terror and hatred surge through his veins. This time, he vowed, he would not fall to their whips. The Balrog roared, its fiery lash striking out, forcing the intruders to scatter. Feanor shouted in Quenya, rallying their spirits. With uncanny dexterity, he sidestepped a deadly blow, bringing his black sword down upon the Balrog's arm. Sparks flew, and the demon bellowed in fury. Yet more orcs poured in, the corridor now a cacophony of shrieks and clashing blades. Maedhros, unable to fight with his missing arm as adeptly as before, nevertheless held the line with fierce determination. The warriors of the House of Fëanor battled valiantly, but the tide was overwhelming. Realizing the mission was on the brink of failure, Fëanor made a split-second choice. "Hold them here," he cried. "I will go on." Before his son could protest, he darted away down a side passage. The roaring of the Balrog and the screams of orcs echoed behind him. He raced with all the speed his scorched body could muster, guided by some unerring instinct. At last, he arrived at a blackened door, carved with the emblem of a crown and 3 glowing jewels. Morgoth's personal vault. With the crystal shard in hand, Fëanor again unraveled the wards. The door slammed shut behind him as he entered, and for a moment the clangor of battle was muffled. Inside, he found himself in a small chamber lit by vile red torches. On a pedestal of black obsidian sat the Iron Crown, heavy and cruel, and set into its brow was a single jewel, blazing with a fierce, pure light. The final Silmaril. Fëanor's heart twisted. At last, the labor of his life, the fruit of his immeasurable skill, the gem that had fueled so much bloodshed. He stepped closer, hands trembling. In the presence of the Silmaril, he felt an aching mixture of love, longing, and horror. For it was a radiant symbol of the two trees' light, yet also the catalyst of so many atrocities. He could scarcely breathe as he reached out. He recalled the legends of how the Silmaril burned the unworthy. Yet it was his own handiwork. Could it reject its maker? Softly, as if with reverent sorrow, he lifted the crown from the pedestal. He felt a searing burn the instant his fingertips touched the Silmaril. A cry caught in his throat. It was as if the jewel itself demanded purity of heart. And Fëanor, who had wrought so much evil in pursuit of it, felt that scalding pain. But he did not let go. "I made you," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "Though I have been unworthy, I will not abandon you." With a last gasp of will, he tore the jewel from the crown. A burst of light filled the small chamber, flinging him backward. He crashed into the wall, crown clattering to the floor. When he opened his eyes, the Silmaril was cupped in his palm, shining but no longer burning. Instead, it was warm, almost comforting. He had reclaimed the Silmaril, but there was no time for exultation, for as the Silmaril's brilliance leapt forth, Morgoth sensed its stirring. A rumble shook the vault, and from behind the door came the thunder of approaching doom. Feanor clutched the jewel to his chest. He knew that escape would be nearly impossible. Morgoth himself might be waiting. Even if Fëanor fought valiantly, how could he overcome the mightiest of the Valar, who had become the Dark Lord of Arda? Yet an idea sprang to mind. He recalled that in his youth, in Valinor, he had studied the hidden properties of light and shadow. He could perhaps harness the Silmaril's brilliance, turn it against Morgoth, if only for a moment. He had no illusions this would slay Valar, but it might blind or stun him. He took the battered crown from the floor, wrenched a jagged metal shard from it, and pressed it against the Silmaril, forging a makeshift lens by the force of his own will and skill. This was no delicate craft, just a desperate improvisation. Still, the luminous energy began to swirl within that lens. Then the door crashed inward, revealing the towering shape of Morgoth. His armor black as pitch, his face twisted by cruelty beyond all reckoning, he stepped forward like a looming nightmare. The room trembled as if the walls themselves quaked in terror. Fëanor's eyes locked with the fallen Valar. In that moment, an unspoken duel of wills ensued. Morgoth recognized, with shock and fury, that this was Fëanor, alive, and that in his hands lay the stolen Silmaril. "You dare?" Morgoth roared, voice echoing like thunder. You who once defied me at my gates, now crawl like a worm beneath my fortress? Your arrogance is unmatched, son of Finwë. Feanor's heart pounded, but he steadied himself. I have returned for what is mine, he said simply, holding the lens contraption. The Silmarils' radiance flared. In a sweeping motion, he angled the lens toward Morgoth, unleashing a concentrated beam of pure white light. The power of the Silmarils' inner flame cut through the gloom like a vengeful arrow. Morgoth raised a hand in an attempt to shield himself, but the sanctity of that light was anathema to his dark essence. He staggered, shrieking in pain as the brilliance seared his flesh. Seizing the opportunity, Feanor sprang past the fallen door, racing down the corridor. Behind him, Morgoth's bellow of rage shook the walls. "Guards, kill him!" the Dark Lord thundered, voice echoing to the far reaches of Angband. With the Silmarils still clutched, Feanor raced blindly, searching for any path that might lead him out of the labyrinth. He found the corridor where Maedhros and the warriors were locked in combat. The Balrog towered at the center of the carnage, flames licking the ceiling. Many orcs lay dead, but the losses among Feanor's band were grievous too. A wild hope surged in Maedhros's eyes when he saw his father clutching the Silmaril. "You did it," he whispered, voice heavy with wonder. But there was no respite. Morgoth was coming, and the Balrog was not yet defeated. "Retreat!" Feanor commanded. "We cannot tarry." In a last surge of coordinated fury, the battered warriors unleashed a volley of arrows at the Balrog, distracting it. The demons screeched, giving them a precious moment to slip away. Feanor led them through the twisting corridors, guided by the same uncanny sense that had led him to the vault, until at last they neared a fissure in the fortress's foundation, a place where the rock had split from ancient volcanic activity. They squeezed through the gap and found themselves on a jagged outcropping leading to the open air. Dawn was just breaking over the horizon, painting the ashen plain with a cold light. Behind them rose the roar of pursuit. Orc horns blasted, signaling the alarm. But Feanor summoned the final reserves of his spirit, focusing the Silmaril's light behind him to blind any archers. Arrows clattered against the rocks, mostly missing their mark. In desperate haste, the small company scrambled down the slope, hearts pounding. They fled across the blasted wasteland of Anfauglith, with wargs and orc riders snapping at their heels. The last fortress of Morgoth's realm receded behind them, and, unbelievably, they escaped Angband with the Silmaril in hand.